If you destroy my family, you destroy yourself.
You still think this is about revenge?
Then what is it about?
You had a choice. At the wedding, you heard your mother. You heard every insult after. You heard what they tried to do with my inheritance.
Dara did not return to her father's house. She didn't need to. She had something better: control. By morning, the financial press had already picked up the compliance review. Nothing explosive, just enough to make analysts curious. Curious people dig. Madam Akinwale hated curiosity. In her world, information moved only when she allowed it to. But this time, she was reacting, not directing. At 10:17 a.m., an anonymous file landed in the inbox of a mid-level investigative journalist. Not a headline hunter, not a gossip blogger. Someone patient, someone meticulous. The subject line was simple: Historical Transfer Records, Akinwale Holdings. Attached were transaction logs from 8 years ago. Layered shell companies, unusual capital movements, funds that moved quickly, then disappeared offshore. Perfectly legal on paper, morally questionable in structure, politically dangerous in exposure. The journalist didn't publish. Not yet. He verified. He cross-checked. And then he made calls. Quiet calls, the kind that make powerful people uncomfortable before they even know why. By noon, Harrison was summoned to his mother's private office. She did not yell. She never yelled. She placed a printed document on the table between them. Explain this. Harrison scanned it. His expression changed. This was before the merger. That is not my concern. He looked up. For once, he did not look composed. Are you saying this is connected to her? Madam Akinwale's gaze sharpened. She activated a legal review yesterday. Today, someone digs into old transfers. You tell me. Harrison's silence was no longer passive. It was unsettled. You underestimated her, he said carefully. Madam Akinwale's jaw tightened. I miscalculated her timing. There was a difference, and both of them knew it. Across the city, Dara sat in a quiet office overlooking the lagoon. Not her father's office, not the Akinwale estate. Neutral ground. She watched the skyline through the glass while her lawyer spoke. If this surfaces publicly, it won't just affect them. It will destabilize markets. Dara nodded once. I know. And if they trace it back to you, they won't. Her tone was steady, but her eyes were not soft anymore. They were awake. There is a moment when someone who has been controlled too long finally understands leverage. It changes the way they breathe, the way they sit, the way they look at the world. Dara had crossed that moment. Mid-afternoon, Madam Akinwale received a private call from a senator. Not friendly, not warm, concerned. There were questions circulating about old financial routes, about political donations, about cross-border accounts. Nothing public yet, but attention was shifting. Madam Akinwale ended the call slowly, very slowly. Then she did something she had not done in years. She poured herself a drink before sunset. That evening, Harrison requested to see Dara. Not at the mansion, not at her office. Neutral territory. A members-only restaurant where conversations stayed between Lennon and Crystal. She arrived first. Of course she did. When he walked in, he looked different, less polished, more human. He sat across from her. No greeting, just tension. What do you want? He asked quietly. Dara folded her hands. I wanted peace. That's not what this is. No, she agreed. It's not. He leaned forward. If you destroy my family, you destroy yourself. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not fear, not doubt, recognition. You still think this is about revenge, she said softly. Then what is it about? He studied him for a long moment. You had a choice, she said. He frowned. When? At the wedding. Silence, sharp and suffocating. You heard your mother, she continued. You heard every insult after. You heard what they tried to do with my inheritance. His jaw flexed. You could have stood up once. The words did not come out angry. They came out disappointed. That hurt more. He looked down at the table. For the first time, the charming, careful son of an empire looked like a man who realized he had been cowardly. But regret is rarely enough currency. Outside, the city lights flickered on. Inside, their glasses remained untouched. He asked, "What happens now?" Dara's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. One sentence. "You're digging in the wrong direction." Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Again. This time, it wasn't strategy. It wasn't satisfaction. It was awareness. Slow, cold, calculating. She locked her phone and looked back at Harrison. "What happens now," she said calmly, "depends on who sent that message." He frowned. What message? But she was already standing, leaving him with the bill and the silence. Across the city, someone else was watching the ripple effect unfold. Someone who had not yet revealed themselves. Someone who had been patient, very patient. And Dara was no longer the only one moving pieces on the board. Home that night, she went to the marina. The ocean was black and restless, folding into itself under the city lights. The same ocean that swallowed the private jet, the same ocean that erased an entire family in seconds. She stood at the edge of the dock, heels in her hand, wind pressing her dress against her frame. The air smelled like salt and secrets. Her phone vibrated again, unknown number. This time, a photo, greeny, taken from a distance, her father stepping into the private jet. But the timestamp was wrong. The date was correct, the time was not. She zoomed in. Her stepmother was visible behind him, smiling, but not at the camera, at someone outside the frame. The message followed seconds later. Some crashes are not accidents. The ocean felt colder. Dera did not panic. She saved the image. Then she did something she had never done before. She called someone she had avoided since childhood, her father's former chief of security, a man quietly dismissed 2 years before the crash, Mr. Okoye. Across town, Harrison was not sleeping. He was staring at the ceiling of a bedroom that had never felt like his. His phone buzzed. His mother. He hesitated before answering. "Where is she?" Madam Akinwale asked. "I don't know." A pause. "You met her. What did she say?" "That we had a choice." Silence. Then a slow inhale. "Listen to me carefully," his mother said. "If there is any connection between her and what's happening, we end it now." Harrison sat up. "End what?" "Her." The word landed heavy. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, final. For the first time in his life, Harrison felt something split inside him. "She's still my wife." Madam Akinwale's voice turned to ice. "She is a liability." He hung up before she could continue. His hands were shaking. At 2:14 a.m., Dera sat inside a dimly lit office overlooking the harbor. Mr. Okoye sat across from her, older, quieter, still observant. "You are certain about the timestamp?" she asked. He studied the photo. "Yes." "That means?" "It means the flight time was adjusted." Her pulse slowed, not sped up. "By who?" Okoye leaned back. "There are only 3 people who could override that aircraft schedule without alerting the board." Dera's eyes lifted slowly. "My father?" "Yes." "The aviation director?" "Yes." "And?" Okoye hesitated. "The co-signatory attached to the merger agreement." Her breath stilled. The Akinwale family had been co-signatories on several joint aviation investments. Her father's jet was maintained through one of those partnerships. "This is speculation," she said carefully. "Yes, but it's not impossible." Dera stared at the harbor light reflecting on black water. If the crash was engineered, it wasn't random, it was precise, which meant motive, which meant someone benefited. Her inheritance transferred seamlessly, almost too seamlessly. No legal contest, no frozen assets, no government interference. It was as if everything had been prepared in advance. Her phone buzzed again. Another image, this one clearer. A dog manifest. 3 names boarded the jet, but 4 signatures were logged. The 4th was scratched out, illegible. Dera felt it then. Not grief, not anger. A realization forming like ice under skin. What if the crash was not meant to erase her father? What if it was meant to erase something else or someone else? She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them sharper. "Who else knew about the inheritance structure?" Dera asked. Okoye answered without hesitation. "The Akinwale legal team." Across the city, Madam Akinwale stood alone in her study. The lights were off. Only the city glow outlined her silhouette. A second phone rested in her hand. Not the public one, not the one Harrison knew about. She typed one sentence. She's starting to look in the water. A reply came instantly, then let her drown. For the first time in years, Madam Akinwale did not feel fully in control because there was one detail she had not accounted for, one variable she had dismissed too early. Dera was no longer reacting, she was investigating, and the ocean does not keep secrets forever.
Dera went deeper. By sunrise, she was in a secure archive room beneath one of her father's old corporate buildings, a place no one visited unless they were looking for something that had been deliberately buried. Paper records, original contracts, hand-signed documents, things that could not be edited with a keyboard. Mr. Okoye stood by the door while she flipped through aviation agreements tied to the merger. There it was, the fourth signature, not scratched out, not illegible, just hidden in a separate addendum. Co-authorized emergency rerouting authority in the event of executive risk. The signature was not her father's, not the aviation director's, not Harrison's. It belongs to a holding company. Minority stakeholder, recently dissolved. Dissolved 2 weeks after the crash. Dera stared at the company name. It was unfamiliar. But the address was not. It traced back to a property registered under a private trust. The trust belonged to someone who had never once appeared in headlines, never attended public galas, never sat in front rows at political fundraisers. Madam Akinwale's brother. A man rarely seen, but deeply embedded in infrastructure investments. Dera felt something cold settle into place. This was not an impulsive sabotage. This was layered, calculated, protected. She exhaled slowly. They never expected me to look at paperwork, she murmured. Okoye gave a small nod, the expected grief. Across the city, Harrison walked into his mother's office without knocking. She looked up, mildly annoyed. "You are early. Did you know about the aviation reroute clause?" Her expression did not change. "I know about every clause that affects our interests. That's not what I asked." She set down her pen. "Careful, Harrison." He stepped closer. There was a fourth authorization. Yes. Why? Madam Akinwale rose from her chair with controlled grace. Because powerful families prepare for instability. That jet crashed. And? He stared at her. And? Her gaze hardened. Your wife's father was unpredictable in the months before his death. Emotional, unfocused. He began reconsidering long-standing agreements. Harrison's stomach tightened. You think he would have pulled out of the merger? I know he was considering restructuring it. Silence filled the room. Did you reroute the jet? Harrison asked quietly. Madam Akinwale's eyes flashed. You are asking the wrong question. Then give me the right one. She stepped closer. The right question is whether that crash benefited us. His breath caught. Did it? She didn't answer immediately. That merger became irreversible after his death. Irreversible. The word echoed. And Dera, he asked. She inherited everything. Emotional, isolated, unprepared, exactly as expected. Harrison stepped back like he'd been struck. You calculated her. We calculated the board. She's not a board. No, Madam Akinwale said calmly. She was collateral. At noon, Dera requested an emergency board meeting, not with the Akinwales, with the Joint Investment Council overseeing aviation partnerships. Executives arrived uneasy. Legal teams followed. She entered last. No pale blue dress, no hesitant posture. Structured ivory suit, hair pulled back, eyes steady. She placed the rerouting addendum on the table. Can someone explain why an emergency override was triggered 36 minutes before takeoff? Silence. A man cleared his throat. Security precaution. Based on what threat? More silence. She slid a second document forward. Dissolution papers of the holding company. Signed digitally. Time-stamped 12 hours after the crash. That company authorized the override. It ceased to exist the next day. The room shifted. Subtle but undeniable. I'm not here to accuse anyone, Dera said calmly. I'm here to understand why my father's aircraft was redirected over deep water without standard reporting. A board member swallowed. We will need to investigate. Yes, she replied softly. You will. That evening, news outlets began reporting on an internal aviation review. No mention of sabotage, not yet, but analysts were circling. Investors were asking questions. Stocks trembled. Madam Akinwale watched the financial ticker scroll across her television, red lines beginning to flicker. Harrison entered the room. She knows, he said. His mother did not look at him. She suspects. She called a board review. Madam Akinwale finally turned and if this becomes criminal, she cut him off. It won't. You can't control this forever.
Her gaze sharpened. Watch me. Night fell heavy over the city. Dera stood alone in her office again, looking out at the water. The same water that had once felt like an ending. Now it felt like evidence. Her phone buzzed. A final message from the unknown number. You are closer than you think, but you are still looking at the wrong family. Her pulse slowed. Not the wrong person, the wrong family. Her mind began turning, slowly, deliberately. If the Akinwales benefited, and her father had reconsidered the merger, and the hidden holding company authorized rerouting, then someone else had to ensure the inheritance transferred cleanly. Someone inside her father's structure. Someone who knew succession law. Someone who would gain control once she inherited. Her expression changed. Not fear, not anger. Recognition. The crash was not just about removing her father. It may have been about positioning her, and positioning her meant someone expected to manage her from the shadows. She reached for her laptop, opened a file she had ignored until now, her father's revised will, signed 2 months before the crash, witnessed by 3 people, her stepmother, the family attorney, and one more name, a name she had trusted since childhood, her father's personal financial advisor, the same man who had guided the inheritance transfer, the same man who had insisted everything was seamless. Dera leaned back slowly. The ocean had not swallowed the truth. It had only delayed it. And now the ripples were spreading far beyond the Akinwale estate. Someone had tried to turn her into a pawn. They forgot one thing. She learnt the game faster than they expected.
The first time he chose her, Harrison did not sleep, not because of fear, because of clarity. For years, he had lived inside a structure built by his mother. Decisions were presented as protection. Silence was presented as loyalty. Obedience was presented as strength. But now, he could see it for what it was: control. And for the first time in his life, he realized something unbearable. He had never protected the one person who actually needed him. At 6:12 a.m., he showed up at Dera's office unannounced. No tailored arrogance, no polished smile, just exhaustion and something raw beneath it. Her security hesitated. She allowed him in. Dera was seated behind her desk, reviewing documents. She did not stand when he entered. "Why are you here?" she asked calmly. Not cold, not warm, measured. He walked closer, slower than usual, like a man approaching something fragile. "I know about the rerouting clause," he said. Her eyes flicked up, and "My uncle signed it." Silence. Heavy. She watched his face carefully. "And you just discovered this?" "I suspected. I confirmed last night." "How?" "I accessed internal trust records. My name still carries weight there." She held his gaze. "And why would you do that?" His jaw tightened. "Because if my family had anything to do with that crash," his voice lowered, "I need to know." Dera studied him, not as the husband, as a man. "Knowing could destroy them," she said. He didn't look away. "It already has." Later that afternoon, Harrison walked into his mother's private wing again. But this time, he didn't ask permission. She was on the phone. She ended the call when she saw his expression. "You accessed the trust account," she said evenly, not a question. "Yes." Her eyes hardened. "That was not your place." "She deserves the truth." Madam Akinwale laughed softly. "She deserves stability, not scandal. She deserves not to be collateral damage in whatever this is." His mother stepped closer. "Do you love her?" The question hung there. He didn't hesitate. Yes. It was the first honest thing he had said out loud about Dera. Madam Akinwale's face shifted. Not shock, disappointment. "You were meant to marry her for leverage." "I married her," he said quietly, "and I failed her." His mother's voice sharpened. "If you stand with her against this family, you lose everything." Harrison's eyes did not waver. "Then I lose everything." That was the moment the balance of power cracked. That night, he went back to Dera, not with documents, with vulnerability. She was standing by the window when he entered.
You shouldn't keep coming here.
"You shouldn't keep coming here," she said.
I'm
without
sorry.
turning.
For the wedding,
Silence. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were not dramatic, not rehearsed, just steady. "For the wedding, for the silence, for every time I let her speak to you like you were nothing." Dera finally turned. Her eyes searched his face. "You didn't let her," she said softly. "You agreed with her." He swallowed. "Yes." That hurt more. He stepped closer. "I can't change that, but I can choose now." "And what are you choosing?" "You." The word didn't echo. It landed, quiet and solid. She didn't melt, didn't step into him. She studied him like she was evaluating risk. "My family may be involved in something bigger than we thought," she said. If I keep digging, it won't stay private. I know. If I expose them, your name will be dragged with mine. I know. They could ruin you. He gave a small, almost broken smile. They already built me. Maybe it's time I build myself. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, not empty, real. He reached into his jacket and placed a flash drive on her desk. Encrypted copies of the holding company's communications, including internal emails between my uncle and the aviation director. Her breath slowed. You're giving me evidence against your own
You're
family.
giving me
I'm
evidence
giving you
against your
truth.
own family.
Her fingers
I'm
hovered
giving you
over the
truth.
drive.
You understand what this means?
Yes.
Yes. It means there's no going back. He looked at her the way he never had before. Not as obligation, not as arrangement, as choice. I don't want to go back. Days later, the tension in the Akinwale estate was suffocating. Board members were calling, political allies were distancing themselves, financial journalists were digging deeper. Madam Akinwale confronted Harrison in the grand hallway. You think she will protect you once this explodes? I'm not asking her to. You are naive. No, he said quietly. I was naive. I thought loyalty meant silence. I thought strength meant obedience. She stared at him. And now I know strength means standing beside the person who was never defended. For the first time in his life, Madam Akinwale had no immediate response. Not because she was defeated, because she was recalculating. That night, Dera sat alone with the flash drive plugged into her laptop. Emails unfolded on the screen. Dates, approvals, strategic language disguised as caution. One subject line made her pause. Asset realignment, post-succession control. Post-succession control. Her chest tightened. Harrison watched her from across the room. Not hovering, not directing, present. You shouldn't have to do this alone, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. I've been alone for a long time. I know. A pause. Let me fix at least part of what I broke. She finally looked up. There was still pain in her eyes, still history, but something else was there too. Possibility. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. She turned the screen toward him. If we pull this thread, we expose more than your uncle. I know. If your mother is involved, his voice didn't shake. Then we expose her too. The room felt heavier, more dangerous, but also cleaner. Because this time she was not fighting from isolation. This time someone stood beside her by choice. And outside, beyond glass walls and city lights, powerful people were beginning to realize something unsettling. Dera was no longer the abandoned daughter. She was no longer the transactional bride. She was becoming something far more dangerous. A woman with evidence, and now an ally who finally chose her.
When the empire turns on its own, the retaliation did not come loudly. It came quietly, calculated, strategic. 3 of Dera's newly appointed board allies withdrew their public support within 48 hours. A regulatory audit was announced on one of her subsidiaries. Anonymous blogs began circulating subtle narratives. Is the heiress emotionally stable? Can she handle inherited power? The attack wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Harrison read the headlines on his phone and felt something familiar. Shame. Because this was his family's signature move. Destabilize the woman. Question her credibility. Make her look volatile. He walked into her office without hesitation. They've started, he said. Dera didn't look surprised. I expected them to. Her composure unsettled him. You're not angry? She gave him a quiet look. I've been underestimated my entire life. This is just a different version of it. He moved closer to her desk. It's my mother. I know. The calm way she said it made it worse. He exhaled slowly. She's pressuring the regulatory council. I heard her on a call this morning. Dera's eyes sharpened. You recorded it? No. She held his gaze. Next time, do. He nodded once, no hesitation. That evening, the Akinwale estate hosted a private dinner. Political figures, financial executives, influence wrapped in crystal glasses and controlled smiles. Harrison was expected to attend. Dera was not invited. For the first time in his life, he refused. He stayed with her instead. They sat in her office surrounded by printed documents and glowing screens. It was not romantic. It was intimate in a different way. He rolled up his sleeves. She handed him files. You really want to do this? She asked quietly. Yes. You understand they won't forgive you. They never gave me the space to need forgiveness. Silence settled between them. But it felt different now. Solid. Aligned. Near midnight, Dera's phone rang. Unknown number again, she answered this time. No greeting, just breath on the other end. Then a voice. Distorted. You are being protected by the wrong man." The line went dead. Harrison saw her expression shift. What? She handed him the phone. "They know you are helping." His jaw tightened. "Let them." "Don't say that casually. I'm not." For the first time, there was fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for her. "If they escalate," he said, "they won't come at you through media." She understood immediately. They'll come physically. He nodded once. The room felt colder. The next morning, Harrison confronted his mother publicly. Not in private, not behind closed doors, in the main conference hall. Board members present, legal counsel present, Madam Akinwale seated at the head of the table. "You are interfering with regulatory processes," he said evenly. The room froze. She tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me? You initiated the audit on Dera's subsidiary. I initiated a review for transparency. After we accessed the holding company communications." A murmur moved around the table. Madam Akinwale's eyes locked onto his. "You forget your position." "No," I replied. "For the first time, I understand it." The air shifted. "Are you choosing her over this family?" she asked. "I am choosing integrity over silence." That word again, silence. The thing he had lived inside for years. Madam Akinwale stood slowly. "If you continue down this path, Harrison, you will be cut off. Financially, legally, socially." He didn't blink, then cut me off. The room inhaled sharply. This was not the obedient son. This was a man stepping out of inherited control. Later that day, Dera received internal confirmation. The regulatory audit had been withdrawn. No public explanation, just gone. She looked at Harrison. "You did that." I challenged it. "You humiliated her." "She's humiliated you for months." "That's different." "No, it isn't," he said quietly. She watched him carefully. There was no performance in him now, no strategic charm, just resolution. "You could lose everything," she said. He stepped closer. "I lost myself once." Her breath slowed. "And you think standing with me will fix that?" "No," he admitted, "but standing against you destroyed it." The honesty caught her off guard. Not dramatic, not desperate, real. That night, security footage from one of Dera's properties flagged unusual activity. A vehicle idling too long outside the gates, unregistered plates, gone before guards approached. Harrison reviewed the footage with her. "They are testing boundaries," he said. Dera folded her arms. "Or warning us." He looked at her. "You are not backing down." It wasn't a question. "No." He nodded once. "Then neither am I." She studied him in silence. "You are different," she said. "I'm awake." A small pause. "You didn't defend me when it was easy." He accepted that. "I'll defend you now that it's hard." The weight of that sat between them. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was earning trust, one risk at a time. Across the city, in a dimly lit office, Madam Akinwale stood by the window again. Her son had publicly challenged her. Her influence had been questioned, and Dera was not folding. She picked up the second phone once more. "They are aligned," she said into the receiver. A pause. "Yes," she continued softly. "If we move again, we move permanently." She ended the call. This was no longer about business. It was about control slipping, and power rarely leaves quietly. Back in Dera's office, the lights were low, documents scattered, tension thick. Harrison stood close enough now that she could feel his presence without looking. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked softly. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said the thing he had never allowed himself to say. "Because I watched you survive things I helped create. And instead of breaking, you became stronger." Her eyes lifted slowly. "I don't want to admire you from a distance anymore." The room felt smaller, warmer, dangerous in a different way. "You're choosing a war," she said. He met her gaze. "I am choosing you in it." Outside, the city paused. Inside, something fragile and fierce was forming between them. Not convenience, not arrangement, partnership. And somewhere in the shadows, the real architect of the crash was realizing something unsettling. Dera was no longer isolated,
I don't want
and
to
the man who
admire
was
you from
meant
a
to monitor
distance
her
anymore.
had become
You're
her
choosing a
shield.
war.
I'm choosing you in it.
The exposure. It did not explode the way people expected. No screaming press conferences, no dramatic arrest on marble staircases. Real power does not fall like that. It collapses quietly, methodically, with paperwork, with signatures, with evidence too detailed to deny. Dera and Harrison did not rush. They built the case layer by layer. Encrypted emails from the dissolved holding company, board meeting transcripts, financial movement patterns tied to the aviation reroute, and finally, the missing piece, a recorded call. Not dramatic, not emotional, just two voices discussing risk mitigation 2 hours before the jet took off. One voice belonged to Madam Akinwale's brother. The other belonged to Dera's father's financial advisor, the man she had trusted since childhood, the man who had ensured her inheritance transferred seamlessly. The plan had not been to kill everyone. It had been to force a controlled emergency landing offshore, a staged crisis, a leverage play, scare Chief Adebayo into locking the merger permanently. But greed is careless, and pilots are not chess pieces. Something went wrong, very wrong. The reroute over deep water left no margin for correction. The crash was not meant to erase a family. It was meant to manipulate one, and it spiraled beyond control. When the evidence reached federal investigators, the reaction was swift and cold. Assets were frozen, passports flagged. The financial advisor disappeared first. Madam Akinwale's brother attempted to leave the country. He did not make it past the airport. Madam Akinwale herself was not arrested. She had insulated herself carefully. No direct orders, no explicit approvals, just proximity. But proximity to criminal negligence is enough to dismantle influence. Board members resigned, political allies distanced themselves. The empire did not burn, it withered. The final confrontation did not happen in a courtroom, it happened in the grand living room of the Akinwale estate. Madam Akinwale stood tall, even with everything unraveling. Dera walked in without hesitation, Harrison beside her. Not behind, beside. "You destroyed this family," Madam Akinwale said calmly. Dera's expression did not shift. "No," she replied softly. "You gambled with lives. You think you've won? This was never a competition." Madam Akinwale's eyes moved to her son. "You chose her over blood." Harrison's voice was steady. "I chose what was right." A long silence stretched between them. Madam Akinwale looked at Dera one last time. "You were supposed to be manageable." Dera stepped closer. "That was your first mistake." No shouting, no theatrics, just truth sitting heavily in the air. Then Dera turned and walked out, for the last time. Months later, the ocean was calm. Dera stood at the marina again, but this time she was not searching for ghosts. She had established a foundation in her mother's name: scholarships, aviation safety reform funding, legal protections for corporate whistleblowers. She did not use her pain as spectacle, she used it as structure. Harrison approached quietly. No designer arrogance, no inherited posture, just himself. "I signed the final separation documents from the family trust," he said. She looked at him, and I don't regret it. The sun dipped lower, gold against the water. She said, "You didn't have to lose everything." He shook his head. "I didn't lose everything." He reached for her hand this time. Not for cameras, not for obligation. Choice. And she let him. Not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. There is a difference. The city still whispered her name, but not as pity, not as scandal, as power. Dera was not born unlucky. She was born loved. She was neglected, used, traded, but she was never weak. The girl who once stood alone at the top of a staircase in a pale blue dress had become a woman who could dismantle empires without raising her voice. And this time, when she looked at the horizon, she did not see an ending. She saw space, freedom, and a future that belonged entirely to her. No transactions, no conditions, no silence, just choice. And that was the real inheritance.
The arrest happened quietly. The investigations unfolded without spectacle. Madam Akinwale's brother was charged. The financial advisor turned on everyone to reduce his sentence. And the truth settled into the city like dust after a storm. Not dramatic, just undeniable. The crash had not been fate. It had been greed. And negligence had cost lives. Madam Akinwale was not imprisoned, but she was finished. Board seats gone, invitations withdrawn, influence evaporated. For a woman who lived on control, obscurity was the harshest punishment. Dera did not celebrate. She stood at her father's gravesite alone one morning. No cameras, no press, just quiet. "I wish you had chosen me," she whispered. Not angry, not broken, just honest. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not turn immediately. She already knew. Harrison stopped a few steps away. He did not interrupt her silence. He simply stood there. When she finally looked at him, he wasn't wearing a suit, no armor, no performance. Just a man who had dismantled the world he was raised in because he realized it was built wrong. "I don't want your empire," he said softly. "I don't want mine either," she replied. That surprised him. She continued, "I want something that isn't built on fear. The wind moved gently between them. For so long, everything around them had been strategy, calculation, defense. This moment wasn't. Harrison stepped closer. I loved you long before I knew how to stand up to my mother, he admitted. She studied him carefully. You loved the idea of me. No, he said, voice steady. I admired your strength. I just didn't have any of my own. That honesty disarmed her more than charm ever could. You hurt me, she said quietly. I know. You let them humiliate me. I know. And I can't erase that. I'm not asking you to. Silence. Then softer, he added. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that man anymore. Her breath slowed. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't control. It wasn't convenience. It was vulnerability. And that was something she had rarely been offered without a price. Months passed, not in drama. In rebuilding, Harrison resigned from the Akinwale conglomerate completely, publicly. He gave a statement supporting corporate accountability reforms. The city gasped. Old money does not confess, but he did. Not to destroy his family, to separate from it. Dera restructured her father's company. Transparent boards, independent oversight, aviation safety investment in her mother's name. She did not harden. She refined. And through it all, Harrison did not hover. He showed up. Meetings, long nights, security briefings, charity planning sessions. He learned to stand beside her, not in front. He learned to speak when necessary and to protect without controlling. One evening, months later, they returned to the marina. The same dock, the same water, but different air. The city skyline glowed behind them. No tension, no fear, just possibility. You know, Harrison said quietly, if that merger had gone the way our parents planned, we would have lived in a house full of silence. Dera smiled faintly. We did live in a house full of silence. He looked at her. And now? She stepped closer. Now I choose who stands in my life. And do you choose me? The question was not demanding. It was hopeful. She reached for his hand first this time. Yes, she said, not because she needed saving, not because of obligation, not because of business, but because he had earned the right to stand there. He pulled her gently into him, not possessive, not performative, just close. For the first time since their wedding day, he held her like a husband, not a partner in strategy, not a political alliance, a husband. You once told me I had a choice, he said softly against her hair. I do. So do I. She looked up at him. And this time, he whispered, I choose you without hesitation. No chandeliers, no photographers, no contracts. Just two people who survived manipulation and decided not to repeat it. Years later, the city would tell a different version of their story. They would say Dera dismantled an empire. They would say Harrison betrayed his bloodline. But those were headlines. The truth was quieter. She found her voice. He found his backbone. And together, they built something neither of their families understood. A marriage not rooted in transaction, but in choice. And this time, when Dera stood at the top of his staircase in a pale blue dress, it wasn't because she was watching someone else's happiness. It was because she was walking towards her own. And he was waiting at the bottom, not to claim her, but to walk beside her.